Jesse the Walking Man Turner, and I have two wonderful guests today. I have Matthew Geary, Superintendent of the Manchester Public Schools, and Rhonda Philbert, from the Equity Officer from MPS as well, and they got a story to tell. They're doing something that I don't think any district in the state is doing. It is a systemic 3-year initiative and still growing into culturally relevant pedagogy and race in their schools. So I'll begin by talking to Superintendent Matthew and asking him to tell me a little bit about yourself and your passion, sir.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for having us today. I have a wife and 4 kids, so I'm really passionate about my family, a son and 3 daughters, and also really passionate about reading, try to get as much reading done as possible. And then finally, I'd say really passionate about the work we're doing in the Manchester Public Schools related to race and equity, and just trying to continue to learn and reflect myself, and hope to help the system learn, reflect, and grow also.
Perfect. Rhonda, how about you?
Good morning, Jesse. My name is Rhonda, as you know, and and my passions are around. I hope to see in the future that children of color, children of marginalized identities, are able to access everything that they need to and every opportunity that they need to. I'm a mom, a wife. I'm also a grandmother, and I have 2, of course, I'm going to say this, beautiful grandsons. And so when I think about my passion, I think about what I would like to see for them in the future.
All right. Now, if I'm correct, this is going into year 3. If I remember right, I started hearing about what was happening in your district because I have some reading specialists in my classes saying, when I was talking about culturally relevant pedagogy or race in my courses, saying, they're talking about that in our district. And that's how the first piece came in. But I wondered, was this an easy initiative? How did it get started?
I guess I would say first, as much as the work has been, sort of, I guess, officially in 3 years in the making, there's been a bunch of work done in the district years ago around race and culture that created a little bit of a controversy and was sort of shut down at that point. So that set us back for sure. And even before we were able to get started with the work with our district, as the superintendent, I had a lot of learning to do from people like Rhonda and my leadership team. So I think, much as this has been sort of 3 years, we're in our 3rd year with the staff. Before I could lead this kind of work, I had to better understand race and equity, and feel really fortunate to have learned a lot about myself and the world and race, things that I just didn't know, was unaware of as a white man of privilege. So much as we're 3 years into our actual work with the district, I would say that even before that, me personally, I was working on growing, because I have really good colleagues such as Rhonda, who will bring things to my attention and never back down from talking about tough stuff. So we are 3 years into the actual formal work that began with an equity informed school climate assessment that we worked on with we used to be known as the Discovery Center, now known as Recenter, a social justice sort of championing organization. And that really allowed us to look at the experiences of students, staff, and families with marginalized identities in the public schools. And that was a long process. Rhonda was part of our district leadership team, so she can talk to you more about the ins and outs of the process, because she worked on it for about 18 months. But that was really our kicking off point, just to gather information.
All right. So before we do that, Rhonda, when I think about my friends of color who've been doing this work, I think it's a lot more than 18 months. I think it's a lifetime's journey. But when I talk to them, it's funny. Michelle McKnight was a panelist on our Understanding White Supremacy salon at the Action Lab at Trinity College with Bishop Zelders. And at one point, Michelle said, "I'm tired. You white people need to go in the room and have this discussion." And then Bishop Zelders' wife said, no, we need to be in the room together. But when I talk to people, they talk about being tired. So I'm wondering, why do you do this work? Are you tired?
I'm not tired. I'm hopeful. I'm encouraged. We do this work every day, and I think I started with this work. It was always something that I felt like I had to do. Like no one had to tell me when I started teaching way back in the day, and I was in my 20s, that my classes, it was science at the time, it was all white supremacy was written all over the work, the curriculum, the textbooks, and my students were 98% children of color, mostly black. So no one had to tell me that. Well, we have to bring um, the the perspective of the children into the classroom in terms of what they needed to know. This has always been. You just asked the question about passion. It's always been a passion of mine because as a little black girl who was educated in our country, mostly in Brooklyn, New York, and feeling left out because I didn't see representation of people who looked like me in just about anything that we studied at that time. So it's a passion, and I don't get tired. And when I get to have conversations with educators who don't look like me, who happen to be white, and when they finally get it, like you can see the light bulb go on, and then I know that because they get it, or they've decided to go on that journey, that it's gonna mean that children are going to benefit from it. So I don't get tired, not yet. No.
And for those of you who are listening in the radio, you can't see Rhonda smile. She is smiling away. This woman certainly loves this work. I wanted to put a little research in perspective here, because this idea of being a young black child growing up in Brooklyn and not seeing yourself in those books, a friend of mine, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop from Ohio State University, Rudine has been did research for a lifetime on multicultural literature and its influence on young black boys. Mm-hmm. And she's given us that term that when I went to your district and I did a PD, mm-hmm. and I talked about diverse books, and we played Rudine Sims Bishop a little bit of a over there. Rudine says that books are our mirrors, and we need to be able to see ourselves in those books. She said books also are the windows that we should be looking through so that we can see others. Mm-hmm. And then I always love when Rudine Sims Bishop said, and if you could step through the sliding door and you could walk a mile in the shoes of others, well, then you have arrived, and that is a transformative experience. Now, the research component is that Rudine Sims Bishop has looked at the comprehension scores of young black children when they see themselves in diverse books. And I don't need to tell anybody, they go up. They go higher, and this is a secret. So not really a secret, but it should be known to people. With a nation where 49% of our students today are students of color, if you want to increase their test scores, you better increase the diverse books that they're reading. All right. So Matt, are your principals excited about this, Superintendent Geary? Are they like chopping down the door?
I mean, I think principals have come a long way in terms of their ability to learn and grow themselves. I think, this, none of this is easy. I think you really involves looking inside. So we talk all the time in education about systems change, and systems change is really important. But you won't be able to change systems without changing people. And so I think principals have really taken the opportunity to dive into this, to learn more about themselves, to learn about bias and privilege. And I think it's not that people maybe had never heard those terms before, but until you really dig in and make it about you and think about it's not really about your teachers or about your students or about the system yet. It's about individually where are you on these issues? So are you paying attention to race? Do you notice race? Are you thinking about culture responsive teaching in classrooms in a really authentic way? I mean, I think again, we tend to look at research and data. And I said when I first became superintendent, we're going to close the achievement gap in 3 years. And really, if you know anything about the factors behind the achievement gap, which clearly I didn't at the time, even though I thought I did, you know that you're not going to close the achievement gap in 3 years. And so there's this urgency because kids only have one chance at second grade to get this moving, as Rhonda talked about her grandchildren. But there's also this understanding that this won't move until people grow. And unfortunately, you can't rush that. So I would say principals have done a good job of engaging in the work. They're at various places in terms of their own understanding and movement. You can see, I think, productive struggle from principals as they're thinking about, who's in their building. If you think about a typical school, elementary school with a staff of 50, say, certified and non-certified staff, the number of different places where people are and their understanding about racial consciousness and implicit bias and white privilege is vast. You have a lot of people, and I think to Rhonda's point earlier about when sort of the light bulb goes on, I think most white people who now have tried to sort of understand this could point to a space and time like where I know I could, and really for everyone it's a different thing. So when you try to think about what to provide for teachers and staff, that I think we want to go to like, oh, we're going to give these workshops to everybody and everyone's going to get it, and we are going to give some workshops to everybody, but I think individuals just having really been engaged in this for the last 3 or 4 years, what makes one individual understand isn't necessarily what makes another individual understand, and so that's what makes this challenging. So I think principals are up for the challenge. Rhonda has done some work training diverse equity teams in each school with support from Recenter, and so I think it's because it isn't only about the superintendent, it's not only about the principal. We want schools and classrooms to be culture responsive places where all kids get what they need after me and after the principal, after board members. So I think we have a long way to go. The work is challenging. I think principals have dug into the work though, and there are various places, as you would expect.
All right, so we're going to talk about those equity teams, and I want to go back to a Facebook post that I saw maybe in the end of August, early September, from one of my former students, Ella Tomczyk, I think is the name, and she had this picture of all these books, and she said, "Look at all these books that I have that they gave me." And Rhonda, tell us about the work with the equity teams, and did your district not purchase a lot of these diverse books for teachers? So I think like last June.
So yes, so the books were purchased, but at the same time, we didn't. As far as the educators are concerned, we had to make sure that they had the mindset and the heart set in order to be able to have to discuss these books with students, to be able to have to be able to know that the children come from different experiences, children have different perspectives, and that the educator needed to be able to accept that from children. So,
all right, so it's we move the district starts making the move, administrators start making the move. We have equity teams, and we start asking teachers to make the move. And I want to tell you something about, never mind the achievement gap, I have a little experience in this. So when I taught on the Tohoto O'odham Reservation, we took this journey, and that was in Sells in Arizona, and what we had 100% Native population, and that curriculum was really a curriculum of white supremacy. And there they never saw themselves in their history books, if maybe for a paragraph, maybe never saw themselves really in their English books. And so we added a Saturday class that had a twist. We still did reading, we still did math, we still did science, but we said we're going to do it from a Native perspective. And when we made that shift 4 years later, we found that the retention rate of our high school students went from 50%, if they didn't attend the Saturday courses with us, that went from 50% to 97.6. So I think the data that we want to look for is not necessarily our test scores, not necessarily, because it's not going to be reflected in the achievement gap, but how many of your students of color, and all your students, the retention rate will improve. Any thoughts on that, Rhonda? Will it happen?
yeah, I definitely think it will, and I'm the optimist, forever the optimist, but I definitely think it will. And I know we're talking about books and we're talking about culturally responsive pedagogy. You mentioned curriculum, but to me, what's most important is that teachers know where they are and where they stand, and how much do they learn about their biases. They learn about, like I said before, they know that children have different lived experiences. They have to know that there's a difference. They have to be able to see color. So when in terms of the equity teams, because you had that question a little while ago, for the first year with the equity teams, what I did was we went in and we trained teachers about self. Like that was the first thing that we did, because to me that's the foundation. And then for this year, we're digging a little bit deeper. But when you talk about retention, when you talk about attendance, when you talk about children connecting to your content, you're absolutely right. It does have to be culturally responsive, but the teachers have to do, or the educators, or even the adults. I'm going to say all adults. The adults have to do the work on themselves first, and then we'll look at. Then we, or at the same time, we're able to make sure that what we do as far as curriculum is concerned, because I know we had a meeting the other day about curriculum, and we looked at a few curriculum units, and Matt mentioned this earlier. Our curriculum needs work. So
I think everyone's curriculum needs work these days.
So our curriculum needs work. So so those are like the aspects and the facets of the work. Like it's layered. It's not like one thing. What you mentioned before, is it just the book? It's not just the book. It's a lot more than that.
It's so if we thought about it, Matthew, you and I as white men, we had to come to grips with understanding that we've been part of this problem in this nation for a long time, in our schools, in our institutions, our prisons, across the board. We've been part of this problem. And you had mentioned you like to read. And I thought, like, what am I reading right now? I'm reading White Rage in my Understanding White Supremacy course at Trinity College with Bishop Elders, and White Fragility, and all kinds of books. And they're great books to read, but they're often books that put me at a discomfort. And I have to confront that discomfort. Is that the same? Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've read some of those. I also think I've always tried as a principal and then superintendent to be reading books kids might read. So I think about The Hate You Give, or On the Come Up, or Dear Martin, or just recently finished The 57 Bus. And I think as a white man, as Rhonda said earlier, the curriculum surely needs work, and we definitely want to fix that. But if you send adults, particularly white adults, into classrooms and you hand them a book, and they don't have any context, any understanding, any ability to empathize with the characters in the book, and then thus the students in their class, a lot of harm can be done. So as much as we want the curriculum to be responsive, we also are a do no harm space. And I think, so for me, the experiences of being able to read books, talk about them with colleagues, particularly colleagues of color, because my experiences as a white man, there's no way to change that, right? So I have to be able to better understand the experiences of people of color. I mean, the 57 Bus was about gender, and so I have to really dig deep and think about non-binary genders, and so I think if you walk into a classroom with any of these books, forget about White Fragility, and I think those are fine, and they're good learning experiences for people, and it helps. But I think when I think about students, if we walk into classrooms and change the curriculum, many people I think just weren't taught, even in their own studies, about this information. So I think about the Power of Illusion, The House You Live In, that talks about the sort of Fair Housing Act, right? Which wasn't really fair at all. So the legislation was written in a fair fashion, but the implementation of that legislation, because it's implemented by people who have biases, and that's not taught anywhere. So for a lot of white educators, white people in general, including myself, that's sort of like new learning. So you don't, and it starts to unlock, make it really clear about why the curriculum needs to change. But if you simply change the curriculum without getting at the hearts and minds of educators, I think what Rhonda said earlier is that's the most important part. And the frustrating part, I think, is that we would like to change the curriculum tomorrow, but we cannot put resources in adults' hands to then put them in kids' hands without the adults being ready to do that, and that involves a lot of heavy lifting with just looking at yourself.
It's an important understanding. I've spent some time on the Navajo reservation as well, and on the Navajo reservation, a majority of the teachers are white. Majority of the teachers have never lived on an Indian nation ever. Come and live on the reservation to teach, and Navajo elders have taken an initiative about. I think that gets at what you're talking about, Matthew. They would say to us that you can't teach our culture to our children, but you can use our culture. And so they took an initiative to have a summer program for those teachers where they got a small stipend, lived on the campus, were fed on the campus, and engaged in a study of the Navajo culture. And they firmly believe that helps those teachers to use those resources and to not teach Navajo culture, but to be able to do it, to be able to use Navajo culture. And I agree with you. Would you agree, Rhonda, that this takes a lot of preparation for teachers, not just giving them the books? I may have made it sound simple with Rudine Sims Bishop. We're just looking the mirrors and the windows and the sliding doors, but a book can be dangerous as well. So could you tell us a little bit about how you're dealing with that in those equity teams?
So, so like I said before, in terms of the equity teams, we are doing a lot of self work. We haven't even gotten to the books yet. And but I do agree with what you said about having adults being able to have the opportunity to be immersed in cultures that are different from theirs, like have a cross cultural experience, because they are very beneficial. Because of course we are all socialized in the American culture, so we see things as I guess most Americans do, even me as as a black woman, but I also have that other lens as a black woman, So definitely, we have to, like I said before, in terms of the educators, just to get them ready and to have them understand that yes, we live in one country, America, but we all have different experiences. It's kind of what W.E.B. Boris talked about, the double consciousness. So there are those of us that live that double consciousness. And then I know that as far as my colleagues are concerned, my colleagues, mostly my white colleagues, they don't experience that. And so that's what that we have to be able to increase their awareness of.
Well, it reminds me of when I did the PD for your district. I brought a lot of those Dick and Jane books in, and they opened some eyes as we laid them out on the tables, and your administrators and your personnel, and they were a diverse group, but everyone got a quick picture. In Dick and Jane, everyone in the picture was white. Every woman was either cooking or cleaning. Every female child was either pretending to cook and clean or iron, and only the males were doing interesting things, and almost all of them were white. And I had a couple as the Dick and Jane books progressed. We had some diversity in there, but I can't remember the the principal in your school district, who was a black principal, and he said, even though there's some children of color in here, this doesn't look like my house over there. So when I'm thinking what you were saying, Rhonda, and Superintendent Geary, is that we've all been immersed in a deculturalization. I mean, Bishop Selder's in our Monday night class for understanding white supremacy always found of telling us there was no such thing as a white race before the 1600s. Right. It did not exist. So to do that, white supremacists had to deculturalize all people. That's what they did. And when I look at the curriculum and the books we're reading, I always tell people we are what we read. And if I look at just in case I'm ever at your house some night for dinner or something, trust me, I will be looking at the books on your shelves. And that's kind of hard now with these new ebooks. But before I get done, I got to remind everyone that you're listening to 105 FM, New Haven. This is the Tom Ficklin Show, and this is Jesse the Walker Man Turner filling in. And I think I'll go for a question for Superintendent. What is your hope for this initiative?
I mean, I guess ultimately you hope that every single kid in Manchester gets what they need. And I think that's a ways away for sure. But I think, so we have sort of that would be the long-term hope that ultimately the system provides every student with what they and family with what they need, and just the amount of work that's required to get there. So we in Manchester have the town has evolved in terms of the student demographics. For a long time, we had some racially imbalanced schools. So the community just approved a second referendum that will have renovated all of the elementary schools by the time we're done with that in 2025. There'll be racial balance that's sustainable across the district. And so I think a lot of this work comes from making sure that students who are they're together from a young age, that we're able to be equipped to talk to them about issues they face, to talk about racism, bias, and all other isms that are just they're there in the world every day. So I think ultimately we want the system to be prepared for that. We are blessed to have a very diverse community in Manchester, and so unlike some other places, you're in the world. If you are in Manchester, Connecticut, in a Manchester public school in a classroom, your classroom looks like the world. And so we don't. So that's a huge advantage we have that we don't, take advantage of yet. We just because we should be in a space where we're able to have these kinds of conversations regularly, and I think we're getting there. But I think there's a long way to go. And to your earlier point about socialization, we were talking about Rhonda maybe a month and a half ago had read. We have a document-based question in a social studies class on immigration, and we want students to be engaged in relevant, meaningful tasks. And so earlier we were talking about immigration, and I like to think that I'm a supporter of people who've immigrated, that we want them to have safe schools and safe spaces and be supported. But at one point I said illegal immigrants, and a colleague of mine, Angela, said it should be undocumented, not illegal. And if you think about the power, well, firstly, so she had to say that to me because I've watched the news. In my head, it is ingrained, illegal immigrants. And I think I'm a person who's supportive of immigration. But that one word changes the entire way you think about people who are immigrants. And so whether you're undocumented versus illegal is a big difference. And so I think words matter, listening matters. We're not really in a time and space where people do a lot of listening. So listening matters. Words matter. I think we're in a time where people say and post and tweet really anything that comes to their brain without doing a lot of thinking about that. And this work requires really deep thought, reflection, and not to say the first thing that comes into your brain, but not to be quiet either, because we have to always be checking each other. And when ultimately that happens with adults, where adults are aware and conscious every day, white adults I'm talking about, Black adults such as Rhonda are aware and conscious every day already. They've been aware and conscious forever. I think that's when the school system will get better. So ultimately, we're looking for student results to improve. We're looking for kids to get what they need in our schools. In the short term, we're looking for adults to really learn and grow. We're looking to get experiences in classrooms to be relevant and meaningful and responsive to the students in front of us. And I just think it's just the work will take place over time, and no one wants better results than me faster. But if there's one thing I've learned in this journey is that unfortunately, you're not going to get student outcome results really fast because I think Rhonda described it as a layered problem earlier, and it really is a layered issue that starts with self and then goes out to systems. And so it's going to take us some time. So I'm looking for steady progress. I'm looking to know that the adults are starting to dig into this work. Ultimately, I'd like kids to feel that. I think, that will first show up as connection with adults and their student experiences in classrooms, and then down the road we would see student results.
So if we thought about this thing, I like this idea. We're putting children first in the district. But I also think that your young people are involved in this as well. Didn't they just vote, Rhonda? Didn't they vote to change the mascot in the district? And is there not some kind of equity high school teams or something in the district? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I could tell you a little bit about it. First of all, I'm just proud of the young people in our district. Yes, definitely there is a Yes Squad, Youth Equity Squad, and there's also another equity squad at Manchester High School. And yes, definitely the young people did vote and worked on and researched about the mascot, and they learned about white supremacy and oppression, and how having an Indian for a mascot in the past now we were definitely subjugating a marginalized group. And so they learned all about that, and they became very vocal. They organized, and we were able to have the mascot change from the Indian to a red hawk. Absolutely. So the young people are definitely involved. They are active, and they are also affecting change in our district.
Excellent. And for
So proud of them.
yes, we all are proud of them.
Mm-hmm.
For our policymakers, our brand new education commissioner, our legislators, I want you to know the data that really matters is not your SBAC scores. The data that really matters is the climate of learning in our schools, of our teachers, our administrators, and our young people. And if they're participating in initiatives like the youth equity squads, well, that's data, and that's the data that really matters. Pay attention to the high school exit rates of our students. Pay attention to our students as they go forward into our community colleges and our universities. Follow that data. And one more pitch for them while we're on it. Listen, equity involves giving all schools the resources and the supports they need to reach all children. I sure would love equity for all. How about you, Matt? Would you like some equity?
Equity
in
funding
schools?
would be great, Jesse. That I think for sure that we we hope that Manchester is an alliance district, and the alliance district funding has helped a good number of our districts. I think there are times when and our results are mixed, our academic results. It doesn't mean that money's not well invested. It doesn't mean that the districts don't need it. It doesn't mean that we're not going to always need it. I think to your point about equitable funding, as long as funding and the vast majority of funding for school systems comes from property values and through local taxes, as long as funding for public schools is heavily based on local property values, there's going to be inequitable funding. So I think state has tried to mitigate that somewhat with the Alliance grant. We surely could always use additional resources, and I think your point about results, again, nobody wants Smarter Balance scores or SAT scores to rise more than me. I also know that there's a whole other story out there, and that in 2019, can our students tell our story? Imagine if the scores that mattered were the percentage of students that have a part-time job. Imagine if that was on the dashboard. Imagine if the dashboard had the percentage of students that cared for a younger sibling. If those two measures were on the data dashboard, you would see spaces such as Manchester high. And again, I'm not suggesting kids have to be able to read, they have to be able to write, they have to be able to think. I think our kids can read, write, and think. There's always room for improvement. But I think when you think about the measures of success, I want our kids to be able to tell their stories, because we have a lot of successful kids doing a lot of successful things, giving back to their families, giving back to their community. And so I think for sure we could, fund it. We could do a whole show on funding for public schools. But I do appreciate your point around equitable funding, and we continue to work with legislators around that.
As our Moral Monday educational ambassador for the state of Connecticut, I will tell you, I think it's time we have an equity march. I think it's a shame that we have a state Supreme Court that decided that the state is not even responsible to provide an equitable education for all children. Just access get you for a basic and adequate education. So that's another case. We'll do that, and I'll probably say, hey, can you people come join me on the march? Rhonda, Walter Dean Myers is one of the most successful, or was. Walter passed away. Walter Dean Myers was one of the most successful adolescent black authors we've had, but never mind black adolescent author. He tops all adolescent authors of the past 30 years. And Walter Dean Myers has an interesting story that people don't think of. When he was a foster child from, I believe it's North Carolina, wound up in Harlem and New York with a fostered family. And he didn't do well in school. School was not his place. But Walter Dean Myers was a reader. And when he was in the 5th grade, his teacher found out that he was so disrupted she didn't know what to do. But she found out something. If you let Walter read whatever he wanted to read, Walter would be quiet. And when she did that, Walter did not disrupt the class for the rest of the year. Now, he did not necessarily follow the prescribed curriculum. When he was 16 years old, Walter was given his 10th grade teacher a problem as well, but she loved Walter because he loved to read, and she gave Walter a list of books. that I would say, and Walter, I know Walter, he would agree. These were culturally relevant books, like the autobiography of Malcolm X. And she gave him this list of books, and sadly that year Walter dropped out, got arrested, went to jail, and in jail he pulled out that list of books. And just like Malcolm X, he started reading the Malcolm X autobiography. He started reading about Marcus Garvey. He started reading about where he came from. And Walter Dean Myers exited that prison, joined the Army, got his GED, and became one of the nation's most successful authors. So, Rhonda, I'm wondering about how does this, could this instill a love of reading? Because that's what I think Walter had.
Absolutely. If we can, well, yes, in terms of reading, but I think the most important piece of that is getting to know and understand who the children are. Build relationships with children. Find out who they are. Find out what they like. Find out what they like to read. Find out, Matt talked about earlier, in terms of maybe some measures, like in terms of, do they have to take care of siblings at home? Are they working? What are their lives like? If we can really get to know who our students are, and then be able to prescribe, let's say, a list of books that talks to their experiences, definitely, I think that would be beneficial. Absolutely.
So we've got this potential, if kids saw themselves, and it's not just black children, it's Latinx children, it's children with same-sex parents, and it's all kinds of children. It's different faiths. It's people who speak different languages attending our schools. It's when we see ourselves, and when my teachers asked me that at one point, sometimes, and I am a white male, and I'm often in a room. Teachers are mainly white teachers in my courses, and they'll say, but why is it always about them? And then I'll turn around and I'll say, if you looked at what this nation is, it's a beautiful tapestry of diversity. We are a shining nation of many cultures, many people. And when we celebrate that, it's not about us. It's not about them, rather. It's about us. And the sooner we understand that, the better we're all going to be. And it does make people think over there. And I wondered, Matthew, you talked about, I think it was, you said, was it Bus 57? And you said it opened up some gender issues. Could you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the 57 bus is taken from a true story in Oakland, maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now, where a girl, student on a bus who doesn't identify gender, is wearing a skirt. The skirt gets lit on fire. The individual who lights the skirt on fire is a black male, and he doesn't intend to commit a hate crime. That's not his area, but because of the way our juvenile justice system works, he winds up tried as an adult, and it's again a very layered story, but it requires you to dig deep around traditional gender stereotypes, around racial stereotypes, around the criminal justice system, things that if you were just walking around like me as a white heterosexual male, you would not be thinking about that stuff. You'd be going through your life every day with a lot of privilege, and so I think the more people can think about others and their experiences. My experience is my experience, and doesn't mean I didn't work hard. I think people get very fired up about the word privilege because they think it implies that they didn't work hard. You can have lots of privilege and still work hard, and so I think I just think that the more people can think about the experiences of other individuals, talk to them, ask them questions, listen to them, the better off we're going to be. And so yeah, I think we talk a lot about race because race is the hardest one to talk about, at least in my experience. People have no trouble talking about poverty. I would say that gender, in terms of transgender individuals and sexuality, those topics are somewhat challenging as well. But I think race for sure is the hardest, is this elephant in the room. And so if you can talk about that one, you can talk about all of them. And there's also a ton of intersectionality, of course. Sort of the more marginalized identities you hold, the harder it is for you, as we know. And so I think this is just about people waking up and being aware of the experiences of others. And however you do that, there might be people who listen to podcasts. I'm not. I would much rather read, but there's so much. The technology and the internet is just a real double-edged sword. So I love technology, although I could most days do without social media. But the access to information that people get, where they can learn in all different ways, I think is one of the greatest gifts of technology. And assuming we can figure out what's a credible source and what's not, which also is a challenge. But I think this work is really about, can I learn about other people's experiences? Can I understand? Can I empathize? And can I stay in that space where I'm emotional and empathetic? And we use the compass that from Glenn Singleton that just allows people to stay in one space. So as a white person, I'm more likely to make conversations about race into sort of a thinking exercise, or jump to action, right? I might be very likely to look at data and technical solutions, when really what I have to do is sort of sit and understand and empathize around the problem. And I think, again, because there's urgency in education, because there's accountability, because of all kinds of reasons, we're likely to jump to action, or to intellectualize, when really around race, for me as a white person, I need to sort of live in that feelings quadrant for a little bit. And you want to spend time in all four quadrants. You don't want to get stuck in your feelings and not do anything with them. But I think this is just about, how do we learn about other people and their experiences. For me, I do it through books and conversation, but there's lots of ways to do it.
So there's lots of ways to do it. Rhonda, I'm going to ask you a little bit about that hope piece again. And I'm thinking about, if I'm exposed to this kind of curriculum, it doesn't matter whether I'm a male, a female, whether I'm gay, I'm straight, whether I'm white, black, brown, or any other color. It will prepare me, because you said it, Superintendent Geary. You said Manchester is sort of a microcosm of the world right now. If I can deal with people respectfully in all walks of life, would that make a better prepared high school graduate, college graduate? What kind of policemen would we have? What kind of teachers would we have? What kind of judges would we have? What kind of lawyers and doctors and professionals and parents would we have, Rhonda? What are you seeing down the road if all of this happens? What will they be like? I'm asking you for the hope.
Okay. I am the hopeful one, and I am the optimist in terms of all of this work. But definitely, if we have a generation of people, be it children, also adults, adults in any capacity, definitely we'd have a place where there is greater understanding, greater compassion, greater empathy, as far as all of our systems are concerned, because we know that this work, Matt mentioned this earlier, this work involves changing systems, eliminating those barriers that make systems inequitable. And so if we are able to have, like we talked about earlier, everybody be part of this learning in every capacity, we would definitely have a much better place, a better country, and hopefully a lot of the ugliness that we see today around race, culture, and difference would not exist, or at least exist to a minimum.
And if we looked at that ugliness that is existent, it is costing people jobs, costing people careers, costing people all kinds of things, prison time, legal cases. All of those things are happening. I'm not an economist, but I'm certain we are losing $1 trillion at least a year to racism and bigotry and indifference in our economy. I generally feel confident that. I wish I had an economist out there join us in and tell us how much we are losing that racism is causing us, and that component. I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Tom Ficklin for allowing me to sit in and host on his 103.5 New Haven radio station. This is Superintendents Talk today. You don't get to hear this stuff. He's blessed me with the opportunity this year to talk to librarians. And what did we discover? That librarians in communities of color had a 20% decrease over the past decade. Librarians, staff, and libraries closed. They don't seem to be closing them in our white affluent communities. So we learned that. We talked to diverse teachers, young and old. Rose Rios was here, and Jessica Arowitz was here, and there are two urban teachers, diverse teachers. And they talked about the diversity issue and how that show was Teacher Talk on retaining and recruiting diverse teachers. And Rose Rios, who is the bilingual teacher in Windham, Connecticut, and also councilwoman in that district, said, listen, Jesse, if you think you're going to just take care of my bilingual teachers or my teachers of color, and you're going to let the rest of the school fall, you are not going to keep us. You're not going to retain us. You have to lift all boats in our schools. So I just love that stuff. You know, now I got the superintendents over here. Before we end, Matthew, you said something in the beginning that I think is going to be unique to Manchester. Sometimes this work gets shut down, and sometimes it gets opened up. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because we skipped it really quickly, but most places, this work gets shut down and stays down. Your place was a little different. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think we've learned from the experience of our colleague Diane 10, 12 years ago, where this work was shut down. And I think going in, you know, the work is difficult. And so it's going to require, if it was easy, we would be done already. Yeah. So going in, we know we're going to push through difficult conversations and we're not always going to get it right. And I think overall, we just have to know that going in, that these are not conversations that are easy, that they're not conversations that are only the responsibility of people of color, that they're all of our responsibilities, that we all serve this diverse group of children. And I think, you know, it's just not easy. And but that's the work that we do. And if you want to work in Manchester, this is the work you have to do. So I think just going in, we know more about how to do this work. We know that it takes time. We know that you have to meet people where they are. We know that you shouldn't judge people. I think President Obama last week talked about judging other people and woke culture and the need for people to just figure out where are they and don't worry about judging everybody else. And so I think we know the work is difficult. We know it's challenging. It's also worthwhile, and you know that going in. And so you get lots of opinions. You talk to lots of people. We have a leadership team that Rhonda and I are on that sort of dives into professional learning for administrators. We have a district equity team that includes students. That again, because students of all people, students are the most ready to do this work. And so I think going in, it's going to be challenging, and there are going to be times when you do things that are potentially unpopular. I mean, not everyone loved the conversation about the mascot. There are many people who still thought, we have this Indian mascot and it's a tribute to the Indians. And again, that's just about your understanding or lack of understanding about that time. We were walking classrooms a couple weeks ago and happened upon this Pilgrim and Indian version of a Thanksgiving book where everyone's happy. They're all getting along. It's you wouldn't know the actual story. But if this is if this is the people heading in with that mindset, I think first it's about awareness, and our responsibility is to challenge the thinking and say, well, have you considered this perspective? And the other thing I would just add is that it is about individuals understanding the experiences of other people. So when I meet with parents, I have to understand their experience. So if you're a parent and you've had any parent, you've had a bad experience with the school system. If you're a black parent and you've had a bad experience with a white educator, if you're a female parent and you've had a bad experience with a male educator, whether or not I'm going to help you or not, you really don't know coming in. And so for me, it's helpful to think about the experiences of other people has nothing to do with me. All I can do is respect those experiences, acknowledge them, and validate them, and not be defensive. And I meet lots of times with people who are frustrated as part of this job. And I think the number one thing they want is to be heard and to have their feelings validated. And I think I've learned over time as an administrator that when people come in, you really just want to listen, as opposed to trying to, I like to make people feel better. So I want to give you tell you why I don't think that's the case, you know, because I think you're going to feel better. And actually, that makes people feel worse. So I think it's about just validating, hearing experiences of other people and being aware of that. And knowing going in, it's going to be challenging. You know, I'm responsible for the whole school system. So there's lots of things that don't go great. And it doesn't mean we don't work hard to make them go well. And so it's I don't love sitting through a session with a person who's telling me, you know, how badly we did, although, you know, on occasion they're right. But that's how the system gets better. It's how we build, strengthen our relationships. And so I do think it's about listening and validating other people's experiences.
So we can't go wrong with preparing leadership, preparing teachers, or preparing students to listen better, to listen to others. We can't do better. These are real world skills to me. I'm seeing CEOs. I'm seeing the president get in trouble every single day with tweets because of this stuff. You certainly seem to be engaged in the work that is helping to prepare our children for the future that they're going to live in. And it seems to me that, you know, there's this idea you said, Superintendent Geary, you said, don't blame. And I thought, you know, there's a biblical passage about who should throw stones in that piece. And I just want to keep that in mind out there. No one is a perfect creature. Rhonda, as a black woman working with other black women and other women of color and white teachers of color and males and leaderships across the district, what has that been like?
So it's been an interesting experience. What I can say though is that I know that when we talk about colleagues and working with colleagues who are on their journey, and so sometimes the thinking is that, well, if you just talk to people of color, that all people of color are in the same space or place when it comes to this work, but that's not true, right? Sometimes the assumption is that, well, this particular colleague is white, and so they have a lot of learning to do. And sometimes that's not true. And I'm saying that because I know that there are some of us in the district who happen to be of color who are still on our journey. And I also know that in our district I have white colleagues who I see as allies. So sometimes I may walk into a room where I'm doing a training, and the only person of color in that room is me. But I also know that there are 2 or 3 people in that room who I know that are allies to the work. And so so when we talk about this work, we just can't make assumptions about where people are because of how they look.
That makes sense. Don't make assumptions. Value others. I can't thank Tom Ficklin and 103.5 FM for this wonderful opportunity to be able to talk about real education issues. And Commissioner of Education, I hope you're listening. You know, you're new on the job and you got a lot to learn, but I have a lot of faith in you, and I hope our policymakers and our legislators are there. And Tom Ficklin, I hope you're home drinking some nice coffee today and probably having your veggie omelet. Thank you, New Haven. Thank you, 103.5 FM. God bless you, and heck, we got a long way to go, people. Thank you.